Damian took a deep breath as he set up his campsite in the heart of the wilderness. It had been a long week of work, and nothing helped him unwind better than the solitude of nature. The flickering fire illuminated his well-built frame, his jet-black hair slightly tousled by the wind. His silver eyes scanned the area instinctively, always aware of his surroundings. As an architect, he was used to precise calculations, but here in the wild, he trusted his instincts just as much as his knowledge. Martial arts training kept him sharp, and his survival skills allowed him to enjoy these trips without worry. The cold night air wrapped around him as he adjusted his Gore-Tex black jacket. He sat against a tree, sharpening his hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl were the only sounds keeping him company. Then it happened, a misstep, a freak accident. As Damian climbed a rocky incline to get a better vantage point, the stone beneath his foot gave way. He reached out to grab something, anything, to stop his fall, but the world spun as he tumbled down the jagged slope. Pain exploded through his body as his head struck a rock. His vision blurred, and darkness swallowed him whole. Damian awoke with a sharp inhale, his breath catching in his throat. He was lying on rough, cold ground, his body aching. The memories of his fall came rushing back, but something was off. The air smelled different, earthy, but with a strange hint of something unfamiliar. Sitting up, he took stock of his surroundings. It was desolate, vast stretches of dry land, strange twisted trees, and a sky that looked a little too purple. His clothes were intact, his black waterproof cargo pants, tactical gloves, and boots still snug on his feet. His belt was still fastened, holding his hunting knife, ferro rod, compass, nutrition bar, and survival multi-tool. This isn't Earth. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. He took a slow, calming breath. Panicking wouldn't help. First, he needed shelter, water, and food. Using his compass for direction, he set off into the unknown, determined to survive in this strange new world. The first few days were grueling. The dense forest was unforgiving, a tangle of towering trees and thick undergrowth, concealing unknown dangers with every step. Damian had no supplies beyond the clothes on his back and the knife strapped to his belt. Survival was not just a challenge, it was a necessity. On the first night, he built a makeshift shelter using fallen branches, leaves, and thick vines to weave together a structure just sturdy enough to keep him off the damp ground. Sleep was scarce, his instincts keeping him on high alert for predators that might lurk in the shadows. The distant howls of unseen beasts echoed through the night, a chilling reminder that he was no longer in familiar territory. Food was his next struggle. He had no bow, no traps, and no experience hunting in a place like this. At first, he resorted to scavenging, gathering berries and edible roots, but hunger gnawed at him. That's when he encountered his first real challenge. Small creatures that resembled rabbits but bore tough, scaly hides and sharp, beady eyes. They were quick, skittering into burrows at the first sign of movement. He tried throwing rocks but lacked the precision. His next attempt was to craft a rudimentary spear by sharpening a sturdy branch with his knife. Stalking through the underbrush, he observed their habits, learning their patterns. On the third day, he struck, lunging at one as it emerged from a thicket. The spear found its mark, and with a sharp twist, the creature went limp. It wasn't easy and it wasn't pretty, but it was food. Fire proved to be another hurdle. The forest was damp, and dry wood was scarce. After numerous failed attempts, he finally managed to spark a flame by striking his knife against a stone, igniting a bundle of dry moss he had painstakingly gathered. The fire sputtered weakly, but he fed it carefully until it grew strong enough to cook the meat. The taste was rough, charred on the outside and barely edible, but it filled his stomach. Water was his next priority. The stream he found was cool and fresh, but he knew better than to drink directly from it. He crafted a small container out of hollowed wood and lined it with dried leaves, creating a primitive filtration system. Using heated stones, he boiled the water, ensuring it was safe to drink. It was a slow, tedious process, but the alternative was sickness, and that could mean death. As the days passed, his body adapted to the grueling routine. His martial arts conditioning helped him endure the physical strain. He moved efficiently, his strikes quick and precise when defending himself against hostile creatures. He learned to listen to the forest, to recognize the rustling of unseen dangers and the silence that preceded a predator's approach. But no matter how much he adapted, exhaustion set in. His muscles ached, his mind wavered, and the constant battle against hunger and fatigue chipped away at his resolve. He needed shelter, real shelter. A place where he could rest without fear, where he wouldn't have to wake every few hours to make sure he wasn't being hunted. Then, on the 7th day, as he crested a ridge, he saw it, a village, nestled in the valley below. Smoke curled gently from chimneys, the soft glow of lanterns flickering as dusk settled in. It was the first sign of civilization he had seen since waking in this unknown land. Hope flared within him. With the last of his strength, Damian started down the ridge. each step carrying him closer to what he prayed would be salvation. Damian staggered to the entrance, fatigue weighing him down. His throat was parched, his stomach empty. Each step felt heavier than the last. His vision blurred, the world around him swaying. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the outline of a wooden gate and figures moving toward him. When he woke, he found himself lying on a small woven rope bed inside a humble wooden hut. The ceiling was made of dried leaves and wooden beams, gaps allowing slivers of sunlight to filter through. The air carried the faint scent of herbs and burning wood. His throat was dry, his limbs weak, his body aching all over. A gentle yet cautious voice broke through his haze. "You're awake." Damian turned his head. A beautiful woman with platinum blonde hair and deep blue eyes sat beside him, a wooden ball in her hands. She wore a simple white cloth draped like a toga, clean but worn. She studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. He swallowed with difficulty before forcing out a hoarse whisper. Where am I?" "A village of Beastfolk," she said wearily. "You're lucky I found you before someone less kind did." Damian forced himself to sit up slowly, wincing at the soreness in his muscles. "Who are you?" "Jasmine." She hesitated before handing him the ball. He took it, peering inside. It was filled with water. He brought it to his lips, drinking deeply, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. Jasmine continued, her tone cautious but firm. "You should know humans aren't welcome here." Damian paused, lowering the bowl. "Why?" She studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Because humans have done nothing but oppress us. Many beastfolk here were forced from their homes, hunted, enslaved. We found refuge in this land because no humans dared to tread here." Damian remained silent, absorbing every word. There was a deep pain in her eyes, a wound that hadn't fully healed. Jasmine's voice softened, though her guard remained up. "I was taken by slavers when I was young. They raided my village, burned it to the ground. My family was killed in front of me. I was forced to serve, to obey." She clenched her fists. "I only escaped because another slave helped me. He was human. Not all of them are monsters, but I've learned not to trust easily." Damian's expression darkened. "I'm sorry. That's horrible." Jasmine exhaled, her posture relaxing ever so slightly. "It's the past now." A long silence stretched between them before she finally spoke again. "Rest. You're no good to anyone in this state." Damian wanted to say more, but his body betrayed him. Exhaustion took hold again, and his world faded to black. As Jasmine pulled Damian toward the shelter, a sharp, terrified scream pierced the night. His head snapped toward the village entrance, where a small, trembling rabbit beastfolk child had fallen onto the dirt path. Her wide, tear-filled eyes stared in horror at the massive creature bearing down on her. Damian's breath caught. A cockatrice, a monstrous fusion of reptile and bird, its scales gleaming like tarnished steel under the moonlight. "It's Betty." Predatory eyes locked onto the child as its clawed feet dug into the ground, preparing to lunge. Time slowed. Without hesitation, Damian tore himself free from Jazz's grip and sprinted toward the girl. "Damian." "No." Jasmine's voice rang behind him. Filled with panic, he was already moving. The cockatrice screeched, kicking off the ground in a blur of motion. Damian pushed himself harder, muscles burning as he dove forward, snatching the child into his arms mere moments before the creature's beak snapped at the space she had occupied. Rolling to absorb the impact, he shielded the girl with his body. Dirt and dust flew around them. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked down at her. "Hide," he rasped, setting her behind the remains of a collapsed wooden cart. "Stay there. Don't move," she whimpered, gripping his sleeve. "Be but." Damian placed a gloved hand on her head. "I'll protect you." She hesitated, then squeezed her eyes shut and nodded, curling up into a small, shaking ball behind the cart. Damian turned just as the cockatrice attacked again. He barely dodged in time, feeling the rush of air as its talons raked where his head had been. He couldn't run, not with the child still in danger. His grip tightened around his hunting knife. "I have to kill it." The cockatrice slashed again. Damian ducked low, rolling to the side, his boots digging into the dirt. He had no armor, no weapon suited for a beast like this. "I need to slow it down." His eyes flicked to his belt, his survival multi-tool. Quickly, he yanked out the small hatchet attachment and held it in his offhand. Not much, but it was something. The beast lunged. This time, Damian didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped in. The move caught the cockatrice off guard, and as it overextended, he slashed his knife upward, carving into the softer flesh beneath its throat. Dark blood spurted onto his hands. The cockatrice reeled back, screeching in fury. It swung its tail, striking Damian in the ribs and sending him sprawling across the ground. Pain exploded in his side, but he forced himself to his feet, gritting his teeth. Focus. Breathe. He shifted into a martial arts stance, low and balanced. His silver eyes locked onto the beast's movements, reading its patterns. The cockatrice lunged again. Damian sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the beak, and brought his hatchet down hard onto its wing joint. The sickening crunch of bone and a shriek of pain filled the air. The beast stumbled off balance. Now! Damian surged forward, driving his knife deep into the soft flesh between its scales at the base of its skull. He twisted the blade with all his strength. The cockatrice spasmed, its massive body jerking wildly before finally collapsing to the ground in a lifeless heap. Blood pooled beneath it. Damian staggered back, panting, his body aching from the brutal encounter. Silence. Then a soft sniffle. He turned. The little girl was peeking out from her hiding spot, eyes wide, staring at the dead monster. Her tiny hands clutched her chest as she trembled. Damian wiped the sweat and blood from his brow and crouched, beckoning her with a gentle smile. "It's okay now," he murmured. She hesitated, then ran to him, throwing her small arms around his neck. Her body shook against his. "You saved me," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Thank you." Damian's chest tightened. He held her close, rubbing soothing circles on her back. "You were really brave," he said softly. "It's over now." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him in awe. "You fought it all by yourself. Are you really a human?" He chuckled. "Last time I checked." Still clutching onto him, she shyly mumbled, "I'm Nola." Damian smiled. "Nice to meet you, Nola." Carrying her in his arms, he turned toward the village. His legs felt like lead, his body protesting every movement, but he kept going. When he reached the shelter's entrance, he knocked firmly. The door remained shut. After a moment of silence, Nola spoke up. "Everyone, it's dead. Damian killed it. It's okay now. Come out." "Then, Nola, Noel!" A desperate cry rang out from inside, followed by frantic scuffling. The door burst open, and a pair of rabid Beastfolk rushed forward, Nola's parents. Their tear-streaked faces contorted in a mix of relief and disbelief as they saw their daughter safe in Damian's arms. "Mama, Papa." Nola wriggled, and Damian gently set her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, her mother scooped her up, sobbing into her hair while her father knelt beside them, gripping her tiny hands as if she might disappear. "Why you?" The father looked up at Damian, his expression torn between weariness and gratitude. "You saved her." Damian nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah." A hush fell over the gathered villagers. Dozens of beastfolk, previously hidden inside, slowly emerged from the shelter. Their eyes flitted between Damian and the corpse of the cockatrice in disbelief. A human had risked his life for one of their own. Murmurs spread through the crowd. He fought that thing alone. No weapons, no magic, and he won. So maybe he's different. Jasmine stepped forward, eyes filled with unspoken emotions. "You reckless fool," she muttered, but there was no anger in her voice. Only concern. Damian managed a tired smirk. "I get that a lot." An elderly beastman, the village chief, slowly approached. His furred hands trembled slightly as he observed Damian with calculating eyes. "Humandon." His voice was deep and measured. "You have done us a great service tonight." Damian straightened, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "I just did what anyone should do." The chief studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You may stay here." The crowd gasped. The chief raised a hand to silence them. "For now," he added. "You will not be turned away after saving one of our own. But do not expect full acceptance so easily." Damian exhaled, nodding. "That's fair." Jasmine exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, then walked up to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Come. You need rest." Damian didn't argue. His body screamed for relief. As they walked back to her hut, Nola suddenly broke free from her parents and ran after him. "Wait." Damian turned just as she grabbed his hand with her tiny fingers. She hesitated, then beamed up at him. "You're my hero." For the first time in a long while, warmth bloomed in Damian's chest. He ruffled her hair, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Get some rest, Nola." And with that, he followed Jasmine inside, unaware that, for the first time, the village had started seeing him as more than just a human. Damian spent his first days in the village under scrutiny. While he had been allowed to stay after saving Nola, the beastfolk remained wary. He observed the village closely. It was primitive, little more than a collection of tipi-like dwellings made from branches and tattered hides. The walls surrounding the village were logs stacked atop one another, held in place by loose stones at the base. The structure swayed in the wind, vulnerable to both nature and attackers. Damian silently came to a decision. He would start helping to village, even if it were just to improve the architecture. It would be something to repay their kindness of allowing him to stay. With that decision made, Damian began making plans, collecting the materials he needed and refining them. One afternoon, while gathering wood outside the village, Jasmine approached, carrying a small cloth bundle. "You've been working all morning," she said, offering him water and a handful of dried fruits and nuts. Damian took the water gratefully, drinking deep before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thanks." She sat beside him on a fallen log. "Why are you helping us?" He thought for a moment, watching the distant treetops sway. Because I can, and because I owe this place my life. She studied him carefully before offering a small smile. You're strange for a human. Over time, Damian began demonstrating new techniques to improve the village. He showed them how to strip logs into planks, allowing for sturdy, wind-resistant homes rather than frail tipis. He introduced kumiko woodworking techniques, enabling intricate joinery without nails, creating durable furniture and reinforcements. At first, the villagers were skeptical. Then they saw results. With planks, homes became solid shelters able to withstand the elements. With kumiko joinery, they crafted chairs, tables, and even doors with proper locks, offering newfound security. When Jasmine struggled to carry a bundle of planks, Damian wordlessly took them from her arms, earning a quiet smile. You don't have to do that, she murmured. He smirked. I know. As weeks passed, Damian introduced better weapons, stone-tipped spears, reinforced bows, and durable hide armor. He helped develop farming techniques, planting crops in organized rows rather than scattering seeds haphazardly. He built a water filtration system, ensuring clean drinking water for the first time. Sanitation improved. Disease declined. Slowly, begrudgingly, the villagers began to accept him. Not all welcomed the change. Jason, an Beastfolk warrior, had always admired Jasmine from afar. He had tried many times to win her affection, bringing her the best cuts of meat after a hunt, offering her rare flowers he found in the wild, even carving small wooden trinkets in her honor. Jasmine always accepted them with a polite smile, but nothing more. When Damian arrived, Jason's frustration deepened. Jasmine, who had never shown interest in any man, suddenly paid attention to a human. Fueled by jealousy, Jason tried to outdo Damian at every turn. He started openly opposing Damian's presence. A towering figure with horns like curved daggers, Jason was one of the strongest fighters in the village. He dismissed Damian's ideas as human trickery, belittling him at every turn. When Damian built new homes, Jason led a hunting party to bring back a feast, hoping to impress Jasmine. But when he offered her the finest cut of meat, she only thanked him and shared it with the village, not giving him the special attention he wanted. When Damian reinforced the village defenses, Jason trained harder, displaying his strength in combat, hoping she would notice. But when he caught her watching, she was watching Damian, not him. One day, Jason saw Jasmine struggling to carry a basket of fruit. He started moving towards her, ready to help her, to show that he could take care of her, provide for her. But before he would reach her, Damian, who had been passing by, effortlessly took the basket from her hands. No words needed. The two had grown so close, Damian didn't need to ask if she wanted his help, and Jasmine made no attempt to put any distance between them. Jason's fist clenched as Jasmine gave Damian a grateful look, completely ignoring him. Later, when Jason confronted her, his voice was tight with frustration. Why do you keep pushing me away? Jasmine's expression remained unreadable. I never led you on, Jason. So his jaw tightened. So you like him? Jasmine hesitated, just for a moment. That hesitation was enough. Jason knew he had lost, and he hated it. One evening, as Damian returned from a scouting trip, Jasmine was waiting for him at the village gate, concern in her eyes. You're late, she chided, folding her arms. Damian smirked, brushing dirt off his hands. Miss me? She rolled her eyes, but the slight blush on her cheeks didn't go unnoticed. Before she could respond, Jason stepped between them. You're getting too comfortable here, human. His deep voice carried through the village, drawing attention. You think saving one child makes you our savior. Damian met his glare evenly. I don't think anything. I just do what needs to be done. Jason scoffed. We don't need your human ways. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. Jason, enough. But Damian raised a hand to stop her. He stepped closer to Jason, looking up at the much larger Beastfolk without fear. Then why do you use the weapons I made? Why does your family drink the clean water from my filtration system? Jason's jaw tightened. The murmurs of the villagers grew louder. Damian didn't wait for a response. You don't have to like me. But don't act like I haven't done anything for this village. With that, he turned and walked away. Jasmine lingered for a moment, then shot Jason a sharp look before following Damian. You didn't have to provoke him, she murmured as they walked. Damian sighed. He doesn't need provocation. He already hates me. Jasmine hesitated before reaching out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. Not everyone does. Damian's breath caught for a moment, but she was already walking ahead. He smiled to himself before following. Under Damian's guidance, the village transformed. The crude log walls that once swayed in the wind were now fortified with stone foundations, standing strong against both nature and enemies. The fragile tipi-like homes had been replaced with sturdy wooden houses, their planks fitted together using precise joinery techniques, ensuring warmth in the winter and coolness in the summer. Weapons and armor had drastically improved. Stone-tipped spears replaced brittle wooden ones, Bows were reinforced for greater range, and leather armor provided much-needed protection. Fields, once chaotic and disorganized, were now carefully cultivated, producing steady crops. More importantly, the Beastfolk had hope. But the changes didn't stop there. Word of the village's transformation spread beyond the forest. Travelers, refugees, and outcasts, Beastfolk who had been cast out, hunted, or enslaved, began arriving in search of sanctuary. At first, they came in small numbers. A handful of weary souls, gaunt from starvation, scarred from past hardships. They were welcomed to the village, offered shelter and warmth to ensure they felt accepted. But as the months passed, more and more arrived. Dozens. Then scores, entire families, desperate for safety, seeking the fabled heaven hidden within the wilds. The village swelled beyond its original size, and with it new challenges arose. Damian took it upon himself to organize the newcomers. He gathered volunteers and divided them into teams, some to cut lumber, others to dig foundations, and skilled workers to craft houses. Rather than just sheltering the newcomers in hastily built huts, Damian taught them how to construct proper homes, ensuring they had the skills not only to contribute to the village, but sustain themselves. This way, they felt accomplishment, pride, and would not become a burden to the village. Jasmine often stood by his side, helping to coordinate efforts. "You're working yourself to the bone," she murmured one evening as she handed him a water skin. Damian wiped the sweat from his brow, taking a grateful sip. "Can't afford to slow down. More people are coming every day." She watched him for a long moment before shaking her head with a small smile. "You act like this is all your responsibility." He met her gaze. "It is." She sighed but didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind his ear. "Just don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Damian chuckled. "That's what you're here for, right?" Jasmine rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her expression remained. The newcomers were surprised to see a human in the village, much less how much freedom and authority he held. Some of the more prideful men among the newcomers even expressed jealousy and contempt when they noticed the closeness between Damian and the beautiful Jasmine, of course in hushed whispers. However, the villagers who had grown to accept Damian wholeheartedly quickly shut down any of those negative thoughts, claiming Damian as their own without any room for discussion. As the village grew, Damian realized something crucial: knowledge was power. It wasn't enough to just build homes and defend the village. If they were to truly thrive, the people needed to understand. So, he began holding lessons. At first, only the children came, their curiosity untainted by prejudice. They sat in a shaded clearing as Damian drew diagrams in the dirt, explaining basic mathematics, reading, and writing. Then, the adults began to join. Warriors learned military strategy and metallurgy, while farmers absorbed advanced agricultural techniques. Artisans improved their craftsmanship with lessons on precision and efficiency. Jasmine often attended, sitting at the edge of the group, watching him with quiet admiration. One day, as Damian finished explaining the importance of learning, the young rabbit-eared girl he had previously saved, Nola, tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Damian, are you going to stay here forever?" He blinked, caught off guard. Before he could answer, Jasmine, standing nearby, spoke. Where else would he go? Damian turned toward her, meeting her gaze, she looking at him affectionately, but also a slight bit of fear. Neither had thought of that question before. She realized she didn't know if he even wanted to stay here. Damian, after regaining his composure, quickly agreed, speaking to the little girl, but never taking his eyes from Jasmine. "Of course I'll be staying here. This is where my home is after all." Jasmine's breath immediately caught in her chest. She remembered during one of their conversations she had stood beside him admiring how the village had grown and improved, mentioning that it's starting to look like home. Damian casually mentioned that he didn't consider a place home, but the one he cared for most to be his home. Damian eventually tore his eyes away from Jasmine to look back at little Nola, and smiled while ruffling her hair. "And you're here too." For the first time, he realized this wasn't just a place he was helping. He had found his home, Jasmine. A few years later, the village was alive with laughter, music, and the warmth of flickering torchlight. A celebration was underway, one of their most sacred traditions. A festival of thanks and renewal, a time to express gratitude for the land, their people, and the fortune that had smiled upon them. Children darted between stalls, laughing as they played with small, hand-carved toys. Families gathered around long wooden tables, sharing meals seasoned with the very herbs and spices Damian had helped introduce. The scent of roasted meat and fresh baked bread filled the air. Dancers swayed gracefully around a large bonfire at the village center, their movements fluid and hypnotic. Drums pounded in rhythm with the beating hearts of all present. For a single day, worries were set aside. The burden of rebuilding, of survival, of past griefs. All were forgotten in the light of the festival's joy. Damian stood near the edge of the crowd, leaning against a wooden post with a small, satisfied smile. He watched as Jasmine laughed with the children, playfully ruffling a little fox-eared girl's hair. She caught him looking and walked over, holding out a wooden cup filled with sweet fruit wine. "You should enjoy yourself," she said, nudging his arm. "I am," he replied, taking a sip. "Just in my own way." She gave him an exasperated look before sighing. "You really are hopeless." Before he could respond, a sudden hush spread through the village. The elder village chief stepped forward, his old yet powerful voice carrying through the silence. "It is time." The crowd gathered around as the chief raised his hand for silence. He looked at Damian with deep respect. "Damian has proven worth not as a human, but as one of us. He has given this village strength, knowledge, and a future." The old man took a deep breath. "He will be my successor." A murmur of shock ran through the gathered villagers. Some nodded, understanding that Damian had more than earned this, while others looked hesitant. A human leading Beastfolk. Then, a snarl. "I object." The deep, rumbling voice cut through the night like a blade. Jason stepped forward, his broad frame illuminated by the bonfire's glow. His nostrils flared, fists clenched at his sides. His sharp brown eyes burned with defiance. "I challenge you to the ritual of grievance." The village fell deathly silent. Damian exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I should have seen this coming." The ritual of grievance was an ancient Beastfolk tradition, a final and absolute way to settle disputes of honor, leadership, or betrayal. Two opponents would fight until one could no longer stand, with no outside interference. No matter the outcome, the dispute would be forever settled, with no room for resentment, revenge, or further challenge. It was the ultimate test. Damian turned to Jasmine. Worry flickered in her eyes as she grabbed his arm. "Be careful," she whispered. He gave her a small smile. "I always am." Jason cracked his knuckles, stepping forward with a confident smirk. "Then let's finish this." Damian took a deep breath and stepped into the circle. It was time to settle this once and for all. The village square became an impromptu battleground, the gathered villagers forming a tight circle around the two warriors. There were those who did not want to accept a human as their leader. Compared to someone like Jason, he was so weak and frail. How could he lead their village? But those were mostly the thoughts of newcomers, any who had hunted with Damian, who had seen him work, who witnessed his focus and determination, knew that this fight would not be a simple one. Jason moved first. With a thunderous charge, he lunged forward, his powerful fists swinging like sledgehammers. Damian ducked the first blow, but barely managed to avoid the second. Jason's sheer size and strength made dodging a near impossible task. Damian twisted away, using his speed and agility to evade. Jason, however, was relentless. Each strike came faster, heavier, forcing Damian to stay on the defensive. A feint, Jason swung high but shifted low at the last second. Damian failed to fully dodge. The impact of Jason's fist against his ribs sent pain lancing through his side. He staggered back, clutching the area. He already knew. At least one rib was cracked. Jason smirked. "That all you got, human?" Damian steadied his breathing. Pain was just information. He couldn't let it control him. Instead of responding, he changed tactics. He let Jason rush in again, but this time, Damian moved with the attack instead of against it. He sidestepped at the last possible second, grabbing Jason's extended arm and twisting it downward. Jason roared in surprise as his own momentum sent him tumbling forward. Damian didn't waste the opportunity. Using his martial arts training, he brought his knee up hard, straight into Jason's face. The ox Beastfolk stumbled back, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes filled with disbelief. Damian pressed forward. He slammed his elbow into Jason's ribs, then followed with a spinning kick to his side, sending him crashing into the dirt. Jason cubbed, struggling to rise, but Damian didn't let up. A precise stomp to the knee sent Jason back down, pain contorting his features. Breathing hard, Damian stepped back, his knife in hand, its blade pressed just beneath Jason's throat. Silence. Jason's breath was ragged, his body trembling from the pain, but he refused to look away. He had always believed that Damian was weak, nothing more than a frail human, but now, defeated, forced to his knees, his leg barely functional, he had to accept the truth. Damian stared down at him, his silver eyes calm, unwavering. He could end it, right here now, but instead he sheathed his knife. Then he held out his hand. Jason stared at it, stunned. His pride screamed at him to refuse, to continue fighting, to not give in to a human. But the truth was clear. Damian had won. With a slow, grudging sigh, Jason reached up and grasped Damian's forearm, accepting his help. The fight was over. The dispute was settled. And Damian was the new village chief. 1 week had passed since the battle. The bruises on Damian's body had begun to fade, but the memory of the fight still lingered. Now, he stood before the village once more, this time not as an outsider, not as a human, but as their leader. The elder chief, now retired, raised his voice. "With our laws upheld and the challenge met, Damian is now our leader." A hush fell over the gathered Beastfolk. For a brief moment, there was uncertainty, hesitation. Then, one by one, villagers stepped forward, bowing their heads. It wasn't just a gesture of submission. It was something far more. A sign of trust, of acceptance, of hope. Damian took a slow breath, exhaling as he felt the weight of the moment settle upon him. Then, he turned to Jasmine. She had been at his side through it all, from the moment she found him half dead at the village entrance to the days of struggle, growth, and change. She had seen his victories, his failures, his quiet moments of doubt. And yet, she had always remained. His hand found hers. She gasped softly, her deep blue eyes widening in surprise as he gently pulled her forward, in front of everyone. Damian's heart pounded. He had faced death countless times. He had battled creatures stronger than him, survived hopeless odds. But this was different. He held her gaze, his silver eyes unwavering. Jasmine. His voice was steady, though his fingers trembled slightly against hers. She swallowed hard, her breath hitching. Damian. Before she could say more, he dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jasmine's hands flew to her mouth, her entire body going rigid. Damian held her hand tightly, his thumb brushing against her skin. In front of this village, he said, voice strong but sincere, I ask you to stay by my side. He took a steadying breath. Not just as a friend, not just as an ally, but as my partner. My future. Jasmine's lips parted, but no words came at first. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her emotions a storm behind her eyes. She had spent so long guarding her heart, afraid of attachment, afraid of loss. But with Damian, those fears had melted away piece by piece. She let out a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. You idiot, she whispered, laughing through her tears. Damian blinked before asking sheepishly, what? Jasmine threw herself at him, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. The crowd erupted into cheers. Damian staggered slightly but quickly caught her, laughing as she clung to him. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, you fool. Of course I will. A deafening roar of approval surged through the villagers. Some cheered, others stamped their feet, and the younger Beastfolk howled in celebration. Jason, standing in the crowd, exhaled through his nose before smirking slightly. Wes, I never had a chance, he muttered. The retired elder smiled, watching the scene with warm amusement. Damian held Jasmine close, his heart full. This wasn't just about leadership. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about home, about belonging. And as Jasmine whispered, I love you, against his shoulder, he knew without a doubt he had finally found both.